Hey, everybody. Mark and I have over 20 years of experience as therapists and as addicts in long-term successful recovery. We know better than anyone what works and what doesn't to break out of porn and sex addiction, heal betrayal trauma, and reclaim your relationship.
And we've poured all of our personal and professional recovery and healing experience into a first-of-its-kind program for addicts, spouses, and couples. We call it Dare to Connect.
At least 4 times every week, we engage with you in real time, in the trenches, giving you the knowledge and the tools to take back your life and relationship.
Whatever else you've done on your journey for healing and recovery, you've never done anything like this.
Mark and I, we've made all the mistakes, so you don't have to. Don't reinvent the wheel.
We all know tomorrow never comes. Look, don't wait one more day to change. Claim your free 2-week trial today at daretoconnectnow.com.
Hey, everybody. I'm Steve Moore.
And I'm Mark Castleman.
We know the pain and heartbreak of porn and sex addiction.
And we know the triumph of breaking completely free.
Every day, we help our clients find hope and healing.
Join us in the fight to take back your life, your marriage, and be stronger than ever.
This is the PBSC Squared podcast.
So we're answering a listener's question 2 weeks in a row, man. We are
I know.
top of it.
Look at us. Look at us go.
Responsive podcasting hosts. I can't even say the word today. I think it's been a long therapy week.
Yeah, it has. That's okay though. It's okay. The fight is worth it, right?
Absolutely. So here's a question that came in. Basically it says, what do you do when the proof is in the pudding that your partner is a sexual addict, but they refuse to acknowledge it? I asked him for a separation at the beginning of December, hoping that would shake him up a bit. He's agreed to couples counseling, but is, quote, offended at my suggestion that he has a sex addiction. There have been many discoveries over our 17 years. Is there a way to help him see, or are we a lost cause? That is a great set of questions right there. And we see this all the time, right?
I was going to say, this is a first for me. I've never, never come across this.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it is. I think it's very common. I mean, as with many of the topics we discuss, Mark and I, we both can very much relate to being that husband, that guy. And it is hard, I think, on both parties, puts a spouse, especially in a very difficult position, right?
For sure.
There's already a disparity in terms of the justice of working through issues like the ones we talk about on this podcast often, right? I am a big believer that in many cases it does to some degree, it takes 2 people and set 2 sets of issues to contribute to major problems. But when it comes to betrayal, when it comes to actions, sole actions on the part of a partner that are damaging the relationship, causing issues, et cetera, oftentimes it's not a fair situation. And what adds to kind of that unfairness, so to speak, if there is such a thing, right, is this notion that, not only I just heard this from a wife the other week. So I have to be the bad guy.
Yes.
Right. So not only on top of, the hurt and the damage of whatever's going on, I got to be the bad guy. Like that, surely that can't be my role. Like that cannot be my job.
Yeah. After everything I've been through, I got to do this too. Right?
Yes.
I got to try to force him to see. I got to bring him out of denial. I got to get us on a good track. I got to go find a therapist. Right.
Mm-hmm.
I gotta. Yeah. It just becomes too much. And, as you and I talked about this, one of the words that really jumped out at us from this question was this word offended.
Yeah.
Right? Is offending your spouse a bad thing?
Yep.
And so let's just jump right into that, right? Is it bad to offend my spouse?
Like the title says, right? Is it quote unquote okay?
Yeah. Is it okay?
The reason why in the title, guys, if you look at the title with both okay and the words okay and offend being in quotations, is the first reason why is because Mark and I both look at this question a little bit in the sense of it being a misnomer. In other words, the wrong question might be being asked. Um, Phrases like okay are oftentimes like a moral judgment call that are ambiguous and hard to decide
Yep.
or determine, right? When we're talking about things like intimacy, intimacy in its purest form doesn't have boundaries around it because of notions like okay, right? It's all about safety or connection or transparency. Um, those ambiguous moral arguments oftentimes just get in the way and muddle things even worse, as does the terminology offend. Um, is it possible for somebody to offend me? Yes, I think to a degree, but only in part. And what I mean by that, right, is at the end of the day, who is responsible for my emotional responses? Me,
Yeah.
100%. Right? At the end of the day, nobody, not even my partner, can or should even try, nor can they take emotional ownership for my stuff. Intimacy, as you hear us say on this podcast, or love, right, is being able to tell people or learning how to tell people, being bold enough to tell people, including a partner, what needs to be said rather than what the other person wants to hear.
Yeah. And it's, and we use this word offended, and I agree with you. Offended is really a matter of perspective. And I'll
Yes.
tell you why. I'll tell you a perfect example from my own experience in life. So there was a time in my deep addiction years where if my wife had tried to grill me about certain behaviors that she had noticed or feelings she was having, or, because I kept my addiction secret for a long time. And if she had started to get close to figuring out what was going on, you could say by my behaviors that I would have been offended.
Yeah.
And what that
Yeah.
really means is it basically would have triggered my fear, my pride, my resentment. Someone's trying to disrupt, my favorite place of self-soothing and escape and avoidance in my life. Yeah, you would have gotten my hackles up, and I would have, been like a bear that's been aroused from his, his addiction hibernation or whatever you want to call it.
Yes.
But today I don't react in that way at all. I actually invite my wife. I give her permission to mention things that she sees. I ask her, hey, if you see these certain behaviors, or you see that I'm going off the track, or you can see I'm going back into old habits, please tell me. Please
Yeah.
let me know. I look forward to her doing that. And I'm at the exact opposite end of being offended. So it very much is being offended is very much a perspective. It's very much an interpretation on my part in response to certain things that I'm being confronted with. So it isn't an
Yeah.
automatic. Well, there's just certain things that are offensive. Well, is that true?
Mm.
Right. So we have to question that word. We have to really step up and look at it, as you said, and also this word, okay. Is it okay?
Yes, absolutely. Well, and when a relationship is functioning the way that it should, right? This is kind of another reflection on the concept, right? Um, Speaking as to our guys who may be listening who find themselves in the same position, maybe even this same husband, right? Having felt highly offended, quote unquote, when my wife would bring up or call into question my stuff, right? It oftentimes, as Mark is indicating, does have to do with, emotional insecurities on my end, or it's hitting on my shame, right? Or things that
Mhm.
to quote Brene Brown, right? We are the things that we are most enraged or when people hit on elements of ourselves or bring up topics that we secretly believe, right?
Yeah, right.
That's when rage really comes out
Hmm.
is when they're hitting too close to home. And kind of to expand on that, you have to ask the question about, how connected, how open, maybe not even connected, but how open are we really in this relationship? Because intimate relationships should be able to tolerate healthy questioning.
Yes.
They should be able to tolerate inquisition, right? Inquiry. They should be able to tolerate partners being able to ask, like, hey, My wife, I've been sober for almost 7 years. My wife ought to be able to come to me today and say, hey, I know this may sound just crazy. I know it hasn't been a problem in a long time, but last night I just, I saw you in your office. You were on the computer. I didn't exactly see what was on the screen, but it was kind of late at night. Like, can you just kind of speak to what you were up to?
Yeah.
Right. And it should allow for that without me going into a place of pride, which I think is what's really probably happening here, or shame when we say offended. That's kind of a euphemism for that.
Yeah.
Right. And going to that place. Well, of course, because I think oftentimes a husband, I know I used to do this. If you really loved me, you wouldn't question that. Right. That usually is where that oftentimes stems from. If you really loved me, if you really knew me, you wouldn't even bring that into question.
Yep. And look at that. That's a strategy that I used all the time.
Yeah.
Right. Sometimes we can put that in the gaslighting category, deflecting,
Mm-hmm.
distracting, moving your attention off of the real issue.
Yes.
You really loved me. Oh, look, we just got completely off the topic of the fact that I probably have an addiction of some kind. Now we're
Yes.
off on whether you love me or not.
When it hits on that more baseline level, right, of a relationship, of being able to, on any level, both partners in a relationship need to be working towards a point where they can both feel free to say, how are we doing?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Are we doing okay? What are we doing well? What are we struggling with? So, yeah, I would say that is the case. Couple of on my I've thought oftentimes about hanging this on my wall, because I swear I say this phrase at least once a day in my office. We tell the truth at any cost in this office. That's what I will tell clients, because that's what intimacy is. That's what intimacy requires, right? Getting away from that okay piece. We can totally empathize with this amazing wife who is feeling some fear, some hesitation, maybe some hopelessness around having to address this, right?
For sure.
With their husband, probably for the 100th time, if
Yeah.
if we read into this a little bit. Again, you can call what we oftentimes do in the name of quote unquote love, too often is actually enablement, right? It's conflict avoidance. It's not wanting to offend or not wanting to create conflict. But, love can't be love if you rob it of truth. If you take away the truth, what is that? I don't know, but it isn't love.
Yeah, because if we're talking about intimacy, right? And I always say, into me you see, into you I see, right? This
Yeah,
transparency, this authenticity. We can't get there if we're enabling or trying to protect unacceptable behavior.
correct.
You just intimacy and avoiding the real issues and stepping around them because you have fear of what the consequences might be, right? I'm going to be punished for bringing this up. He's just going to take the same approach that he always does, and sidestepping and turning the attention back to me. Or maybe our marriage might even be over if I push this too far.
Yeah,
And so that all of that fear and all of that enablement and rationalization really becomes a wall that prevents us from getting to the place of true intimacy, true connection. And that's, like we say, fear derails authenticity. You
yeah.
can't have authenticity and intimacy and fear at the same time. They
Yes.
just can't coexist.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And I think that those conversations are always going to be scary to a degree.
Oh yeah, for
You
sure,
know,
right?
I
Yeah.
mean, I think I jokingly say to clients and colleagues, I'm probably not doing my job right if I don't piss off at least one person a day, because
Right.
that's the truth, right? I mean, being a good therapist, part of that job is telling people hard stuff. It's confronting thinking, it's challenging thought patterns, it's doing all of those things.
Yeah, and
And
that's scary for us. It's not
it
like as
is
therapists that we're
exactly.
not afraid. It's very much we experience this concept every day. Feel the fear and do it anyway.
It gets better, right? We've gotten better at
We are
managing it
we
and
are
molding
better at
it.
it. Yeah,
But I
we're
think
better at it.
nobody sits down and at least in a healthy state, and says, geez, how can I just rile this person today?
I
Right.
know,
Or
right?
how can I just rattle their cage? Right. It's always uncomfortable. But so the fear, I think, is always going to be there. It's if we allow it to derail, right, or rob us of our authenticity, that's where it becomes problematic.
Yeah. Because you can feel it, but you kind of push it off into the background. And I call it little acts of courage just little acts of courage, just little daring to step out,
Yes.
right? And to dare to do something that's scary.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So, kind of breaking this question down, because there were actually kind of multiple questions being asked there.
Mm,
We'll take a subsection and we'll talk about this phrase. Is there a way to help him see, see meaning his behavior, right, or the implications, or are we just a lost cause,
yeah,
right? That's a tough one.
it
I have a couple
is.
of thoughts about that. I know you do too. The first, right, is that there is a way to help him see, but you play a small role in that directly coming about. Meaning, right, at the end of the day, we're all entitled to our thought patterns. We're all entitled to our feelings or perceptions. There's no way to make anyone, including a partner, magically see this. But there are some things that we can do that help to bring in. I think you use the phrase, Mark. Bring in other messengers to the conversation, right?
Yeah. And it's understandable that this wife wants him to see. She cares.
Yeah.
Her so desperately wanting him to see the truth and to really become authentic. It really is evidence of how much she cares. She's not trying to put him on the spot and crucify him and destroy him. She really wants this to work. She's like I often say, when our partner spouse is coming to us with these issues, it's their cry to us to connect. I want to connect to you. I
Yeah.
want to be one with you, and this stuff is separating us.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I want to bring it out and put it on the table so that we can become united. So it's
Yes.
not a negative thing that she's wanting so much for him to see. It's really evidence of how much she cares about this relationship and about him, frankly.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I completely agree. And the way, Brene Brown has some really, she's one of the world's kind of leading experts on shame and some other topics. And I love what she has to say about accountability. She uses this term, maybe I've mentioned this before, of holding up a mirror to your partner, right?
Mm,
And what that actually means. The way to really hold someone accountable isn't to become aggressive or attacking. The way to hold someone accountable is to do the opposite of what we're conditioned to do, which is of those things, which is to right meet it with complete and total vulnerability. Because oftentimes those anger pieces, those frustration places, I think can, in some ways, actually mitigate the severity of the issue to the other person. But what really cuts deep in the right way isn't by getting louder or more boisterous. It's by really dropping your guard as much as possible and saying, you need to know how your behavior from where I'm sitting is impacting me and impacting this relationship in crystal clear terms, right?
yeah.
In the most loving way possible. You are hurting me, and here is why. Your actions when you do these things, it impacts me in this way, right? It's the opposite of that, you son of a, how dare you, piece of, whatever. It's the exact opposite, right? It's being willing to double down on the intimacy if possible, and being that right there. If the question is, right, how do I help him see? The suggestions we're going to give after this are going to be based on that concept, right? Is how loving and how vulnerable can you get? Because even though you can't control his side of the story, there is a piece of this that, they will set the stage for, I think, the best possibility for him to be able to be open to that.
Yeah. Here comes the sentence. I'm going to let him see into me completely.
Mm-hmm.
No mask, no guards, no pulling punches. I'm gonna say it exactly like I'm feeling it.
Yeah.
And you had said, Steve, before we started, right? I'm gonna love him enough to let him be uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
We could even say I'm gonna love him enough to let him be offended.
Yes,
We're gonna
absolutely.
the topic of this podcast. Yeah,
Let him be offended, for sure.
exactly. Yep.
Being offended, quote unquote, is not necessarily bad, because sometimes that questions behavior. And that's not a necessarily a bad thing. And I know that I know we're kind of getting short on time. If we were to kind of look at the next side of this, I would pose a question to both this person who, put out this question to us, as well as to their spouse. You know, be asking yourself if you're the partner, but he also should be asking himself, why do I, right, react this way to the possibility or the topic of going to get therapy,
Mm,
right? Where is that averseness coming from?
yeah.
Because that right there, because I can tell you, having been on both sides of the coin, where that has either been highly averse or highly not, right? As we talk about oftentimes on these podcasts, if my wife were to come in here today and say, "Steve, I think you're acting out again. I think we need to go to therapy," there's of course going to be a human part of me that's just going to be like, "What the crap?" Like 7 years, lady. Like that's going to be like an instant human response. But what's my authentic response going to be? That's an op. Fine, I disagree and I know I'm not in that place, but if you feel that you are, I mean, I could see a world. I had a long history in this. I could see a world in which that would be the case. So if going back and doing some therapy or working on some of those issues, it's not going to do any harm, right?
Yeah.
It's an opportunity to connect more. It's an opportunity to provide safety, right? It's an opportunity to uh help my wife work through some of those feelings, and I will benefit as a result.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. If I don't have anything to hide, if there's nothing going on
Yes.
here, why am I so resistant
Hmm.
to the concept of coming together with a professional and putting and getting some help, talking about things openly and honestly and authentically? How is that negative or bad
Hmm.
if everything is just fine? And
And
I want to talk for a second from the angle of the addict in this, with
yeah.
regard to the husband. I understand what this feels like. The reason that we're so resistant when we're stuck in addiction or unwanted behaviors or things that we know are not right, that aren't honest, that aren't faithful, that aren't whatever, the reason I resist talking about that and bringing it out into the open is, frankly, I'm scared. It scares the living daylights out of me. What's going to happen to my reputation if someone learns what I'm doing in secret? What's going to happen to my marriage? My wife is never going to see me the same ever again. I mean, there are a lot of issues going on as to why I'm offended, to why I resist, to why I throw up walls, because this scares me to death. And I was in that place for decades. And so there's some empathy to be shown to the guy struggling with addiction as to why he's so resistant. It's
Absolutely.
understandable. It's
Totally.
actually normal to feel that way. But if you choose to stay there and stay stuck there, you cannot make progress. You cannot come out of this until you're willing to face your fears and dare to step out into the light.
Yeah.
And I know that that's terrifying.
Yeah. Well, and what you say is so true, right? I mean, we addicts, we live with a very real fear, as we oftentimes talk about, right? Fear of discovery, fear of what people are going to think. It's terrifying. It's
Hmm.
absolutely terrifying. So we can totally empathize with that fear-based thinking and feeling like you're throwing yourself off a cliff, in a really scary way to open up like that. But at the same time, it is absolutely it is a prerequisite for change to happen in a relationship on any level, be it around this or be it around something else, right? There has to be a space in a relationship where people can, again, they can ask questions, they can question things, they can examine things. If your relationship is not in a place where it's where one or both, or at least one, but I mean where both of you isn't comfortable with scrutinizing it, then there's a problem, and that needs to be looked at. It needs to be
Yeah.
addressed.
Certain things can't be said. We just don't go there. How dare you?
Yes.
Right. All of these walls we throw up, we're never going to be able to come to a place of true connection and intimacy. And our assignment is really along those lines, right? The thing that we encourage, this spouse and the husband as well, if he has any type of willingness, is please start getting involved in some kind of external recovery system,
Yes.
something that's outside of the two of you. It's
Hmm.
so hard when you're in it to be able to see what you need to see
On both sides,
on both sides,
both for
right?
the addict as well as for a
Hmm.
partner.
And so for the partner, there's things like S-Anon, 12-step programs where you can learn how to start to set up boundaries and to start to have healthy dialogue with someone who's struggling with addiction. How do
and
you
get
navigate
input,
it? Yeah,
right? And
right,
get input from other people who are dealing with similar stuff,
and who have been
right?
there and have navigated
Totally.
through it. So
Totally.
we need outside sources. So
Yes.
for the addict and for the spouse, both. Uh,
Yeah. And this is a good goal, I think, Mark, to give, because this is applicable to our listeners no matter where you're at in recovery. I have yet in my entire career come across a couple. Okay. Okay. I take that back. It's happened like one time. I can
wow.
think of like one example where this wasn't the case, but I have, other than that exception, I have never had any client ever come to me and go through the list of ways in which they're reaching out to people, and I've been able to look at them and authentically say, "That's too much. You need to back off from it."
yeah, yeah.
Right?
Yep. You're getting too much help. You're reaching
Yeah,
out too
exactly.
much. You're
Hey,
being too transparent.
too much insight,
Yeah,
too much
yeah,
support from other people. You don't want all that support. Support's no good. So you're right. I mean, wherever you're at in this process, we can all do with more frequent gut checking with other people on whatever level that looks, be it professional or otherwise.
yeah.
So
So get involved with some 12-step, either on the addiction or on the spouse side. Individual therapy, of course, or group and couples programs.
yes.
Right? If the individual side is just a little bit too scary or daunting, start out with a group. Start out with other couples that are going through similar things. Right? The goal is to bring in outside voices, other messengers into the conversation. So
Yes.
that it's not just the two of you in your myopic, very, very closed and small little box. You've got to get outside that.
Yes.
And it's just critical. That's how Steve and I came out of the places that we were in, is we had to
Mhm.
be willing to start to get outside help.
And if you find like a good therapist who knows what they're doing, they will be able to help you navigate this in a balanced way. One of the hallmarks of a good therapist is always a willingness to hear out both sides and come at it from an unbiased place, right? And that's not always the case with every single situation, but that's what you want to be shooting for. And so if you've got good people and you're taking the time to find a right fit, you'd be surprised how much that can help.
Absolutely.
Awesome, everybody. Well, thank you for tuning in. As always, please keep up the submissions. We love. We always have topics to present on, just like we do in therapy. But just like in therapy, we'd always much rather address issues that are coming up specifically for you. So thank you for reaching out, and please do keep reaching out if you have a question or an issue, be along any sort of the the sexual addiction spectrum, the connection intimacy spectrum. We have a contact form at pbsepodcast.com where you can go and you can fill that out, and we would love to address that for you in some form or fashion.
All right. We'll see everybody next week.
Have a great one.
Hey, everybody. Mark and Steve here. Are you looking to take your recovery and your marriage to the next level?
We work with individuals and couples one-on-one.
With both in-person and online therapy options, you have access to the experts anytime, anywhere.
To learn more, visit us at pbsepodcast.com. Everything expressed on the PBSE podcast are the opinions of the hosts and the participants and is for informational and educational purposes only. This podcast should not be considered mental health therapy or as a substitute thereof. It is strongly recommended that you seek out the clinical guidance of an individual qualified mental health professional. If you're experiencing thoughts of suicide, self-harm, or a desire to harm others, please dial 911 or go to your nearest emergency room.